In the 1930s, New Zealand overcame the Great Depression. Hope and prosperity returned. There was a social ideal to see people better fed, better clothed, and better cared for. The government aimed to provide state rental accommodation as fast as people could fill in application forms. New Zealanders were justifiably proud.
In New Zealand, there is still the sanity of people having tea and cakes, with children playing round them, eyes unspoiled by sight of horrors, ears not yet deafened by the sound of bombs.
When Britain declared war against Germany in 1939, there was an immediate response. On radio to the nation, Michael Savage, the Prime Minister, broadcast these words.
Both with gratitude for the past and with confidence in the future, we range ourselves without fear beside Britain. Where she goes, we go. Where she stands, we stand.
New Zealand was again at war. In 1941, the National Film Unit was established. Its purpose was to promote the war effort. Weekly Review documented the war years at home and overseas. This was pioneer filmmaking.
This is one way of getting all washed up in the Pacific. And if you forget to wash behind your ears, even your best friends won't tell you. But there are other kinds of washing too. In fact, a man's work is never done. Out of the strangest copper comes the whitest wash. Of course, it's so much easier with a washing machine, and this New Zealander built his own. All he has to do is pop in his clothes and put the lid on them. He probably doesn't like washing his dirty linen in public. A little energy on the end of the handle does the job. This machine is its owner's pride and the envy of his fellow men. But his ingenuity didn't stop with a washing machine. He built a wringer too, and it works perfectly. Well, it works. Just another example of the resource and skill of a typical New Zealander. He can well be proud of the 1,001 things washed by his own hands in his own machine. Well-made New Zealand.
All day, the men search the strait. The flag signals action, and there goes the first of the crews. There she blows. The hunt is on.
In the grain lands of Canterbury this year, we've been reaping one of the richest yields in New Zealand's farming history. At no other time have we needed so much grain. This crop, the fourth in successive years in this paddock, will give about 60 bushels to the acre. On the richer lands, the Army has been helping farmers to bring in 80 bushel crops. Even the light lands have been planted and are giving a profitable harvest. Just about the oldest way of earning a living in New Zealand is the taking of flax. Today, seasoned flax cutters who have earned piecework rates in the swamps for 25 years and more are taking their place, like all other workers, in the pattern of a world war of production. From the stripping mill, beam after beam of flax fiber is pushed out into the sun, ready for another stage in its useful journey to Britain. In the mill yard, the stuff is loaded onto trucks and taken away to the 200-acre bleaching paddock. Here also are many old hands in the flax game, seeing that the fiber gets proper treatment. Spindles, long rows of them, prepare the thread. Of all the people in Foxton, 1 in every 6 now works somewhere in the native flax industry, and outside labor comes in too. The many threaded warps are prepared for 140 looms, simple looms which make the pieces for the sides and ends of wool packs. Threads of New Zealand flax spun by New Zealanders can now replace the jute wool packs made by the cheap labor of India. And so now, the shipping of vital New Zealand wool cannot be delayed for any want of wool packs. The wool goes to Britain, safeguarded by a new turn in New Zealand's oldest industry.
This soldier is not here to admire the scenery. He is here to keep watch. As long as it is only the wind that moves, the grass and the trees, all's well. On this pipeline, which he and his companions guard, much depends. From the water in this lake comes power for the nation's industries. On these transformers depend farm and factory, but these men are their guardians. In all weathers, they maintain a ceaseless vigil. Night and day, they are on guard.
It looks good, any way you look at it. It's made of rock and earth and clay, just like any other country. But for us, it's different, because it's where we live. It's clean and fresh because it's young. And it's not just scenery. Where the mountains level off, there's room enough to grow food and build homes. It's good for living in and for play. All round, it's pretty good. We can organize things here so that play balances work, with everybody living good, full, useful lives. In other countries, it has happened this way. Death has fallen on the land and the people all over Europe and Asia. Evil has put a stranglehold on decency. Murder comes to villages. Even the plants of the earth are not immune. It has happened in Britain. War attacks humanity as well as bricks and mortar. Hope crumbles as the buildings crash in ruins. Women weep while children learn their last lesson about life, their first about death. So it looks this way to us in New Zealand. It looks as if the men of New Zealand must be armed, practiced with the sword so that the plow can keep on turning, trained for war so that someday peace may give us time to organize our lives our way once again. Here then is the argument. £1 for every comfort we possess while we send these men away from comfort. £1 for every time they're weary while they work for us. £1,000,000 every time one of them dies. All we've got while we ask them for all that they can give.
Just a few months ago, these men were working alongside of us in shops, factories, cowsheds, and offices. Good workers and good friends. We might be talking to a man in the tram or in the pub one day and find him in uniform the next week, an Anzac. Civilian into soldier. It's an old story, but this time it is about us, and that makes it different. There is no goose-stepping here. Just the swinging stride of free men who have put on their working clothes and got into step for the biggest job ever tackled. Poor deluded country lads, Hitler called them, though no army in all history has known better what it was up against or what it was fighting for. They helped to make this country the way it is, happy, prosperous, free. Most of these men have never been to sea before, except perhaps to cross the straits. In the good times in summer, the surf at Muriwai has drawn them away from home, or the pines at Waikuku, or the scarlet carpet of Pahutakawa petals on the road to Ohope Beach, or maybe just the fun of taking the kids to St. Kilda, or Sumner, or Takapuna. This time it is no picnic, and the end of the journey is halfway round the world and back again. It is the adventuring of men going off to war. And under it all a grim purpose, a war to be fought by men who have the courage to say au revoir, when they know that for some of them it must be goodbye. Some of us must fight, these men and more of us when the time comes. We are proud of them, and our pride is mixed with sorrow at their leaving us.
Everyone soon settles down to shipboard life. Light-hearted, they enjoy a song in the sun, and there are always letters home to be written. Ahead lies a mighty task. To all of them, it's a great adventure. Emergency stations. Boat drill is an important part of routine life on board ship at any time. It's more important still on this voyage. In an emergency, discipline is essential. There's a place for everyone, and everyone must be in his place. Gift parcels sent by the National Patriotic Fund Board are distributed. Cigarettes, chocolate, comforts from home that show we are not forgetting them. Every man gets his share. Their pleasure is our reward. It's one way we can all do something to help. A hand of cards is a pleasant break from more active pastimes, such as boxing. It keeps the lads in fighting trim for the job that lies ahead. Courage, strength, and quick thinking will be needed. This is one way of warming up. The Maoris have their own way. It expresses that spirit of defiance which Maori and Pākehā alike possess.
By 1940, Nazi Germany had annexed Austria and invaded Poland. Soon, Great Britain was surrounded. Vital to her security was the Suez Canal. It governed the shortest sea route to India and the southern dominions of Australia and New Zealand. From down under came most of Britain's meat, wool, and dairy products. Oil flowed from Basra across the desert to the nearby ports of Tripoli and Haifa. Though Egypt was an ally, she was threatened by fascist troops in the Italian colonies of Tunisia, Libya, and Ethiopia. Under the command of Major General Freiberg, the first New Zealand troops were sent to Egypt. On the way, some of them visited India. It was an introduction to a different world.
This is the port of Bombay, as New Zealanders saw it when they passed through on their voyages. Here at home, we see India only in the newspaper headlines, a mixture of Kipling, Mahatma Gandhi, the Taj Mahal, and Sir Stafford Cripps. But the India beyond Bombay showed something of its real self to our men as they stayed for a while on the edge of this potentially great and rich nation. Behind the fine buildings, they saw some of the teeming millions for whom Britain is now attempting to organize self-government. For thousands of years, they have lived close packed between the Himalayas and the ocean. Now comes their opportunity to catch up on the racing progress of civilization, on the steady processes of government that develop democracy. Great buildings symbolize India's richness. The people symbolize all the peoples all over the world whose destinies come in these years to the point of decision.
After 14 months of continuous service, the New Zealand cruiser Leander rides at anchor in a Middle East port. In 6 months of convoy duty, she has helped to escort 396 ships to safety. She has beaten off sea and air attack, and she has come through with hardly a mark on her except the blistered paint on her guns. This New Zealand ship, manned by New Zealand men, has lived up to the finest traditions of the Navy. They borrowed this breeder gun from the Italians. It works better from our end. Torpedoes get an extra special share of attention. Below decks, it's the same story. What can't be mended can be made in this floating machine shop. There are no Delilahs on this ship, so strong men keep their hair. At the domestic arts or at the arts of war, these men are equally skillful. They ply a needle or an anti-aircraft gun with the same deadly accuracy. It's a way they have in the Navy, like the traditional rum ration, which is both a stimulant and a little piece of history, and very pleasant too.
Still they come. More Kiwis unload at a Middle East port to reinforce Freiberg's men. Pushing ashore on lighters is a crowded business, but the boys are glad to leave the ship and eager to stretch their legs on this desert they've heard about. First, kits have to be lumped again, and there's queuing up again. But it's worth it to get a good hot cup of tea. Time to gather up and move again. The boys take it easy, finding their shore legs and getting used to sun and sand. But they don't walk far. Trucks are waiting. They pile in and are off on the desert road to camp. A few days later, they're on parade again. General Freiberg's here to look them over. He needs men who are fit and tough. Not veterans yet, but they measure up.
the Western Desert. No cities here, no civilization to suffer devastation, no populated streets, no people looking to the sky at night to see the bomber's moon. No women, no children, no trees, nor any plants, no grass, no animals, only men and their machines and guns, only wide sky above, desert, and fleecy clouds that mean the battle weather's here. Rehearsing now, New Zealand troops soon had met Rommel's divisions in the battle for Libya. Man against man, tank for tank, gun for gun, bombs for bombs, and victory ahead. Nothing but sand, sand and men, and the sound of war. Desert, sand and rock and sky, battlefield of nations. It is only desert, but a whole world contends for its possession. No riches to be won, freedom to be fought for, and in these brown acres, the future history of man.
I have something to tell you that's vitally important to all New Zealanders and to the future of our country. It's about war, the price of war, the cost of war. We are thousands of miles away from the scenes of conflict and do not personally experience war. A bombing raid in Britain with the announcement there were some casualties cannot convey to us the tragedy and the sorrow, the sadness and the pain of those in the towns where the raid took place. We hear of mass murder and brutality by the Nazis and the fascists. The people in all the countries occupied by Germany are starving for food. Hundreds of thousands of children have died in Greece through shortage of food. These are the sufferings that are part of the price of war. Tanks, aeroplanes, ships, guns, all use up material that in peacetime are used to produce the things that you and I normally consume. This year, however, it has been decided not to increase taxation, but to raise a greater sum by way of loan than in any previous year of the history of the Dominion. I would suggest that we confine our spending to those goods that we really need.
Silk stockings mean much in a woman's life, and rightly so, in the piping days of peace. But these are not the days of peace. Attractive as they may be, silk stockings are not essentials, but life will go on without them. Substitutes will be found. But aeroplane fabric and parachutes are essentials of modern war. The silk that went for other things now helps pave the road for victory. The women of New Zealand are making a substantial contribution to the national welfare by uncomplainingly doing without silk stockings and other non-essentials. Those who believe that in the midst of the most frightful war in the world's history, civilian life can remain untroubled and unchanged are living in a fool's paradise. All must contribute to the price of freedom, for freedom must be paid for, not alone with the blood of our sons, but with our wealth and with our personal discomfort. And yet some say business as usual. Futile, senseless, selfish words. Business must go on, but it can't be exactly as usual. Stop spending money on non-essentials. Lend what you save to your country for your own and your country's good. Invest in 3% national savings. We must lend for victory, not hope for it. Join the great civilian army that makes its savings fight in the defense of the nation. Make the money you can spare much for you. Feel that you too are doing your bit.
An appeal for binoculars for the armed forces opened to a big audience on the second day of the Wellington Racing Club summer meeting at Trentham. A big crowd came to watch the races. Hart's fine run in the big race of the day put everyone in receptive mood for General Puttick's appeal for assistance. The army was there in force, and it didn't need binoculars to see the Dunedin mare winning all the way to a fine finish. When Hart had led the field back off the course, the racing club went to the right people with the right publicity for this important appeal. Mr. Eric Ridderford, President, made the Wellington Racing Club's donation to General Puttick, who thanked the club, explained the great need for instruments not now available from outside New Zealand, and said that he hoped the public would give, lend, or sell them to the government. The appeal had immediate results, but the Army, Navy, and Air Force need more and more proactive service. Their needs are urgent. We can give them, lend them, or sell them, but we must do it now.
Now the patrol is approaching the scene of action. They will dismount, place their guns, mount their posts, and be ready for the imaginary enemy. If the enemy were real, if he crossed the sea and stormed the beaches, the mounted rifles would be ready.
This is how the Home Guard started, with marching and drilling and not much else but enthusiasm. Some people thought we were funny, just Saturday night soldiers in old clothes with a few antiquated weapons. Perhaps we still look funny to those unimaginative people who haven't yet seen how indiscriminate a shell can be. In the last war, New Zealanders saw this machine gun from the other end. They brought home many like it as trophies. Now the German Spandaus are in service again, but firing our 303 ammunition. Even a shotgun with a solid slug is deadly. But as guerrilla fighters, the Home Guard soon learned to make up for any lack of guns or rifles. Now, despite shortages, they are a real fighting force. Jam tin bombs are deadly and demoralizing to the enemy at close range. Scrap metal, a plug of gelignite with fuse and detonator, and there you are. The bomb fuses are tipped with a match head compound. Strike, throw, and... But of all the homemade weapons, the Molotov cocktail is dearest to the Home Guardsman's heart. It can be made at home of common materials. Hidden men in camouflage suits stop a dummy tank with a landmine and plaster it with their Molotov firebombs. If after that there is any fight still left in the tank crew, it's knocked out of them with Tommy guns.
For acts of the devil or acts of God, the capital city is prepared. More than 200 men of the Emergency Fire Service turned out for this rehearsal with their new equipment. They have 18 trailer pumps to draw water out of the harbour through rising mains cut for the purpose. There's men and equipment here to handle anything that comes, although it looks as if a flood might have them worried. We're in this for boots and all. First, the soles are cut out. An army marches on its stomach, but the army's boots are just as important. Each boot gets 2 of these soles to start with. The uppers, already sewn and machined, are first attached by hand, and the boots begin to take shape. This is fast work at any time. It calls for greater speed than ever today. New Zealand factories are aiming to produce 1 million military boots a year as day by day our army grows. On this machine, the uppers are attached more firmly, ready for the final sewing. This is skilled work, and it calls for strength, quickness of the hand and eye. The final sewing of the uppers onto the sole is careful work. Strong linen thread soaked in hot wax is used. It will hold fast against the toughest wear. In every stage, skill and speed are essential. To soften the leather for the next stage, the boots are dipped into water. It's certainly not the last time they'll be wet. Heels, already cut and joined, are next attached by a machine that drives nails home a dozen at a time. The boot is almost finished. This is vital work. Women, too, are doing their share of the work. And whether it's stitching uppers or blackening the finished boots, it's just as important. They have been made in New Zealand by New Zealanders.
There was no desert fighting in the early months of 1940. The soldiers trained and dug anti-tank ditches. Later, during the British offensive against the Italians, New Zealanders performed vital tasks behind the lines. They were responsible for transport and supplies. They did reconnaissance. They laid railway tracks and operated the trains. Whether on parade or in the shelter of their tents, the soldiers found life to be a contest against the heat, the sand, and the flies.
On this train, nobody pays fares. On this line, where the train stops, that's a station. Out of the window anytime, the view is always the same. It's the western desert, with the outside world at one end of the line and a war at the other. New Zealanders are running these trains, and New Zealanders are making the tracks they run along. New Zealanders have built and are building these steel tracks across the western desert. With Indian troops to help them with the labor, they have set construction records. They have kept their line close behind the front lines. They have served our armies with supplies. With some machines to help them, but not many. With plenty of skill and tons of energy, but without many of the amenities common even to a rough construction camp. Without much water, on hard rations, in heat and dust, and when the cold winds blow. With all these disadvantages, they still have set an unequal pace in pushing their line forward. Take a look at these men. One of these days, they'll come back home, and thousands of others like them. Take a look at their faces. Let us be sure that we remember them.
Not altogether a second Ellerslie, but if there's no tote, it won't be missed. Picking winners from these is certainly a gamble, but when it comes to horseflesh, New Zealanders are more at home. It's fun for the riders, and it's fun for the backers. And for everybody, it's a grand relaxation from theodolite reading and map making. And the boys are very grateful to the Arab Legionnaires for the loan of their fine horses. Yes, the donkeys have had bad news. They're down for the next race. It's only 30 yards. Well, you try running 30 yards with a hefty New Zealander on your back.
The Women's Auxiliary Army Corps is 1 year old this week. In one crowded year, thousands of girls from every part of New Zealand have entered camp for training to release men for combat duties. With a sergeant to bark commands, they soon learnt the meaning of Army PT. And bitter experience taught them that an army marches on its feet. The music's still the same, but the words are now, come to the cookhouse door girls. Good meals, fresh air, and plenty of exercise make them enthusiastic about Army life. To the Army, they bring a feminine touch. For the lucky ones came the biggest thrill of all, service overseas, where fitness is more than ever important. They arrive in the Middle East on active service. Approaching the Great Pyramid of Cheops, the tourists get a close view of some of its 2 million blocks of stone. There's 85 million cubic feet of it, so the girls realize what a few rocks can do when they get together. The guide tells them the story of this pyramid. It's one story they've heard they can put in their letters home. Leaving the pyramid and setting off to see the Sphinx, the tourists get looked over by some native women. With girls from New Zealand, South Africa, Britain and America in Egypt today, competition's keen.
On his way to discuss war problems with the British government, New Zealand's Prime Minister breaks his journey in the Middle East. Mr. Fraser is met at the airport by Sir Miles Lampson, British ambassador to Egypt. And then away to the job that has brought him here, to bring personal greetings from the New Zealand people to their boys overseas, to see for himself the conditions under which they live and train and harden themselves for battle. In a Cairo street, familiar to the New Zealand soldiers of another generation, there is the New Zealand Club. And through these eastern streets comes food all the way from down under, a little piece of home under the long shadows of the minarets. The Egyptian Prime Minister and Mr. Fraser meet at the British Embassy and discuss matters of importance to both their countries. And then he goes on to a reception at Shepherd's, attended by Egyptian officials and senior officers of the British Command. General Wavell gives Mr. Fraser a first-hand account of the war in the Middle East. Out at the beautiful grounds of the Gazira Racing Club, the troops are waiting, and Mr. Fraser wastes no time about getting amongst them. He seems to know everyone, and everyone knows him. But there is still that timetable and other men to see, more messages to receive and deliver.
To buy Christmas presents in Cairo, most New Zealanders went to the mosque, this quarter of the city where hundreds of bazaars line the streets. To reach the mosque, the boys take a galley. The Cairo taxi service is unique. It hasn't been hit by the petrol shortage. Baffling signs don't mean much to boys out to buy what they want without being sold. A soldier's pay goes further here. Now you know where Mabel's Christmas necklace really came from. You can buy everything under the sun in these bazaars, even the smell of Cairo. Christmas shopping over, the boys pile in again with presents for home.
After a year of training, the New Zealand division was hastily sent from Egypt to Greece, there to block the advance of the Nazis. It was a futile gesture. New Zealand troops were soon evacuated to Crete, expecting to move on back to Egypt. But here they faced a new ordeal. They were ordered to hold the island. These battle-worn soldiers were ill-equipped for the onslaught to come. Against them, the Nazis launched the first ever airborne invasion. German losses were huge, but finally they gained a foothold. Again, New Zealand soldiers were in retreat. Crete was a disaster for New Zealand. Of nearly 8,000 soldiers, half were killed, wounded, or taken prisoner. For cinema audiences at home, the news was bad.
The New Zealanders, Maori and European alike, have faced tremendous odds with great courage. They were almost entirely without air support, yet they met and held a near attack of unprecedented extent and violence until they were literally blasted out of their positions. They hurled back and decimated the Nazi parachute troops. without food for days, and in some cases even without water. Many of them suffering from wounds and sickness. They retired in orderly fashion to the beaches, from which they were evacuated by the never-failing Navy. Their courage, their endurance, their repeated proofs of an unconquerable spirit, their sufferings, their sacrifices will not be in vain.
It's a big day on this wharf in the Middle East today. A big day for some of our lads. They're going home. Not in the way they'd like to be going, perhaps, but certain that they have done their share. Every attention is theirs now. Every attention that we, by our efforts, can give them. They don't need labels to know where home is. And they've still got a smile and a cheery wave that Hitler couldn't beat. Now it's over the water and home to New Zealand.
From the north across these peaceful waters comes a shadow. Japan. War really comes to New Zealand. Parliament assembles to discuss new grave dangers to our security. We see for the first time the prospect of unfriendly feet attempting to despoil our land. What can we do? We have heavy batteries at our coastal defense positions. Over the outer waters, we maintain a constant aerial patrol. We have tanks, and heavy tanks they are too. Heavier by far than anything any enemy could land against the strength we should throw to meet him, and against our rage at his temerity in disturbing our New Zealand way of living.
Made up their mind it's no good staying at home and getting cold feet about the war. Our papier-mâché is made from 1-inch strips of waste paper. Whether it's for slings, splints, basins, trays, or any other first aid or hospital equipment. With their covering of waterproof glue, they can be used even for boiling water.
It is the backing material which is pulled off the retread rubber before use that provides the linen for bandages. At this stage, the material is about as stiff as a stiff collar. It is smoothed out, torn into standard bandage widths, and packed into a laundry bag. After a great deal of washing, all the filling comes out, and the next job is to unravel the bag wash. On 2 days each week, when their children are at school, these voluntary helpers of the Order of St. John are turning out bandages for the NZEF.
We would like your ideas on how to make something useful, conserve supplies, help each other, and the war effort.
The war is near to home. Small children know about it. The bread they carry home is sold unwrapped. To help overcome wartime shortages, shopkeepers appeal to customers. Housewives know about it. Now they must call for food that used to be delivered. Each visit to the store reminds them now that war comes daily nearer home. They must walk, and gladly they do walk, while it means that soldiers ride. To bring a basket or paper for wrapping the goods they buy, these are small troubles, cheerfully accepted, for the sake of ships and sailors crossing dangerous seas. The traveler on his bike, calling for the warehouse order from the grocer, assumes again the human dimensions his motor car disguised before. Restrictions on petrol are serious for some. For others, well, there's always a way round a small difficulty like that. Who wants a car anyway? It's good to discover once again the joy of keeping close to simple things. And they make the best of it. Ride in trams or buy a bike, if they can buy a bike.
This car owner solves the petrol problem by piping into a gas-tapped Bowser. The balloon holds enough for 10 miles of travel. And this car owner beats that by getting 12 miles out of the coal gas in a cylinder on the back of his light car. He pipes from gas installed in his garage. Batteries, that's the solution, they said, and tried their hands at making electric motorbikes. In friendly rivalry, each designed his own. One used 4 batteries to make a 24-volt job, which he built from scratch in 2 days. Easy enough to the builder of one of New Zealand's first aeroplanes. The other has removed the engine from an ordinary motorcycle and used the frame. He fitted 3 batteries, which gave him an 18-volt bike. Now both sail off to work at something over 20 miles an hour. No petrol worries. And how silently they run.
The process of adjustment is not easy. War is not a comfortable condition when it comes so close to home. When men go away, women must wrench themselves away from old routines and do men's work. Between calls, this woman taxi driver sews for her family. The war on the home front is more real now than ever it has been. All the ordinary things of life are changed by it. The ordinary ways of doing things are different. Ordinary people do extraordinary things in wartime days.
Unloading the trucks goes with the job of driving them. Neither is easy work nor light. Hauling mails to boats and trains and lumping off the heavy bags is work that is just as important as maintaining frontline supplies. Despite other wartime deficiencies, our mail service has never been seriously interrupted, thanks to these women who are doing a man-sized job. The skill of driving heavy trucks in busy wartime traffic is a skill these women have learnt, and it isn't as easy as it looks. The hand that rocks the engine wields the lipstick, and they're ready for the road once more.
If a man can use a lathe, why not a woman? Turning metal is a skill some of us are being taught. Even driving a crane is easy enough after a little practice. Everywhere on our Air Force stations you'll find us at work. Not as many of us as are really needed, but our numbers are steadily growing. And we're doing work that's releasing men for other duties. Once some of us were used to driving cars. Now we service them as well. Meals must be ready on time too. Lines of hungry men keep some of us busy.
With the dawn of every day, this work is being done by women, behind our planes. Watch some of them now, preparing a flight for action. This is no game of make-believe.
I took over this farm a year ago. We'd had 12 months training, and here we still work under the direction of the supervisor, who visits us often. We've got 300 acres, and we run about 1,100 sheep. So doing all the work keeps us pretty busy. Both of us have always been keen on country life, so we started doing our bit in this war by working on the land. Now we've got this place on our own. It's grand.
Out of the city, city women are at work in the fields. Here they are, hoeing and thinning mangels, winter fodder for stock. Our land must fight as our army fights. Since war began, these women have worked on farms in the weekends. Not for them the pleasures of sport, nor a lazy seaside life. And the money they earn goes to provide parcels for the boys overseas. They may be taking over their jobs, but they're sending them the wages.
When the Kiwis broke the Nazi cordon round El Alamein, these action pictures came out with them. Division had been rushed from Syria to Egypt, straight at Rommel's forces. Axis armies en route to Alexandria were stopped. Here, our transport operates under enemy fire. We suffered some casualties, but Rommel was stopped. Just a few miles further east was our Mediterranean naval base, Alexandria, but Rommel was stopped in his tracks. They're wounded, but they're cheerful. They did the job required of them. They blocked the way. An American ambulance helps with the NZ casualties. An air ambulance from the Royal Australian Air Force transports our wounded quickly back to hospital. As usual, we have many prisoners. Some of high rank. Prisoners are searched. These are Italians. They seem quite cheerful. Water is shared with the prisoners. Rommel claimed a great victory. These are its symbols. Enemy equipment destroyed.
Today is proof that the warrior spirit still lives. While the sun shines, more wood can be cut for the fires and more food can be prepared. There are many to eat it. 8,000 Maoris and Pakihas have come to the ceremony, including men of the Maori battalion and 300 schoolchildren from all over New Zealand. Today, tribal differences and old quarrels have been set aside. Lieutenant Ngarimu is regarded as belonging not to one tribe, but to the whole Maori people. After the ceremony, Mr. Ngarimu thanks the Maori people and the people of New Zealand for the honor.
This is Ngarimu, and I wish that Moana could be here to see the tribute paid to us and to all the Maori people because of what he did to win the Victoria Cross. He loved this country so well that he was glad to fight for it.
Since war began, these Wellington voluntary workers of the Red Cross Society have packed 6,000 tons of parcels for prisoners of war. 1 million parcels in all, and here's the millionth parcel coming off the packing line. The Prime Minister is here today to receive it and to thank these women whose work has meant much to many a prisoner of war. With energy and enthusiasm, they've packed their parcels at a speed of 7 a minute, which is nice work by these parcel-packing mamas. These are aircraft letter forms arriving in the Wellington General Post Office. The forms are sorted according to their destination, United Kingdom, Middle East, India, or Canada, and according to whether they're service or civilian. After sorting, the letter forms are taken away to be photographed onto miniature film. Here are 6,000 letter forms being handed over. 16mm film is loaded into the camera, which takes its place in the recordac instrument. The door is locked to preserve secrecy of correspondence, and the run begins. 15,000 a day can be dealt with in this room. The processed film from the cameras is examined to see it has all been properly exposed. The process brings a bundle of 1,500 letters down to the one little roll of film, making a great saving of weight and space. Aircraft mails go out to Britain, Canada, Middle East, and India. And other miniature films come back from these places and have to be converted into readable letters. Here, an inward film from the Middle East is having its density checked before going on to the enlarger in the darkroom. The film rolls through above the lens, and printing paper rolls through below. The paper is machine developed, 3 rolls at a time, and the letters become visible. For all this, the post office charges a 5-penny stamp for the services and 10p for civilian mail. Within 24 hours of the forms reaching Wellington, the miniature films are out at Rongotai Airport, and soon the aircraft mail is on board.
To us over here in the Middle East, today's a day of all days. It's mail day. We know there'll be letters from home when one of these giant flying boats glides to anchor on the waters of the Nile. The mail is soon unloaded and brought ashore to the houseboat where it is checked by our own postal unit. In a matter of hours now, we'll be hearing again from mothers, wives, families and friends. Here, high-speed unloading and preliminary sorting are carried out. This is where rugby training comes in useful. Our parcels get plenty of handling, and this is what happens when they're badly packed. Repacking delays delivery, if they can be repacked. Items of clothing which arrive at the dead letter office are sorted and sent on to men without parcels who need them most. Here's a well-packed parcel, sewn up in linen, address clearly written, and contents listed, certain to reach its owner. The truck speeds out from the city and into the blue on a long desert road that leads to camp. The mail from New Zealand has arrived. It may be a letter, a parcel, a newspaper. It may be weeks old, but it means we've not been forgotten.
On the road to Tripoli. It is January, and the 8th Army is still on the move. Ever since October, when they began their westward offensive, they have given Rommel no rest. Now he's in full cry for the Tunisian border. The New Zealand division, that ball of fire, presses on along the road littered with burnt-out guns and tanks, relics of the enemy retreat. The problem of the native inhabitants of villages such as this was considered. Proclamations were ready. Supplies were available to villagers whose stores had been pillaged by the enemy. The Kiwis quickly introduced these natives to the delights of afternoon tea. At 15-minute intervals, Hurry bombers and fighters swept into the sky, and they swept it clean. With no Luftwaffe in sight, they peel off for a spot of ground stopping. Over the advancing army they raced. Then came the bombers, the upper millstone in the grinding of the Axis forces. 1.25 million pounds of bombs a day was their way of softening the Axis defenses. Where they led, the army followed. Between the two, the enemy began to crumble. From all directions came prisoners. Some surrender at the revolver point. Some walked carrying white flags. Some rode in trucks. Some just sat and waited to be picked up. Soon they were streaming back to the prison cages. And large cages were needed to accommodate 200,000. But these were not the important prisoners. The 4th Indian Division had captured Generals von Arnim and Cramer. Von Arnim, in trophy, took leave of his captors before being taken to England by plane.
For bravery in the field, the Victoria Cross for Lieutenant Upham on the left, the DSO for Lieutenant Colonel Kippenberger. Here Upham receives his medal and ribbon.
To Sergeant Keith Elliott, veteran of Greece, Crete and Libya, went the VC. At Ruwayzat, Sergeant Elliott led his 19 men in a desperate rearguard action, silencing 5 machine gun posts and capturing 130 prisoners, despite being wounded 4 times himself. But the VC was not the only recognition of the bravery of this farmer from Maori. His portrait by the official war artist will be added to New Zealand's Gallery of Heroes.
Despite the war, art is flourishing in New Zealand. We found proof of this when we previewed an art exhibition entitled Artists in Uniform, which is now touring the Dominion. Some 500 pictures were submitted by men and women serving at home, in the Pacific, and in the Middle East. From them, this collection was made, a collection that is unique in the history of art in New Zealand. On our visit, we asked official war artist Russell Clark to tell us something about the pictures.
Now, most of the paintings in this exhibition have been done by amateurs. In fact, many of the exhibitors haven't thought of painting before at all.
Some of these pictures are quite good, aren't they?
I had a brother who wanted to be an artist. He didn't like the idea, though. I always think artists and that sort of people are a bit crazy, don't you?
Not particularly crazy. Painting and drawing is often done by very sane people.
I like that one, but some of them are not very good.
They do show you the places the boys have been to and what they're doing, don't they?
Exactly. In spite of the fact that many of the exhibitors aren't trained as artists, they wanted to put down something they've seen or been through. For instance, here's Marty Kemp in the Middle East. Here's a picture of syncopation at Narawahia. This is Gargle Parade in a WAC camp. Of course, the comment need not be humorous. Here is something the artist has really lived through. These aren't just pictures of personal experiences. They're documentary records which are important in New Zealand's war history.
Artists in Uniform is an exhibition that mirrors the life of those who served. It proves that art belongs to the people. Anyone who sees this exhibition won't write it off as just another visit to an art gallery on a wet Sunday afternoon. Wartime has special problems for civilians, and New Zealanders are no exceptions. There are 101 things that keep us on edge. To counter this, wartime concerts are well established in England. And in the main New Zealand cities, concerts of classical music are now a lunch hour feature. Wellington has just begun a series of such concerts. Leaving the rush and the bustle and the noise of the streets, workers enter the hall, where for an hour they can expect music, far removed from a busy city. Afterwards, they'll be back in the rush and the bustle and the noise, but this hour will be undisturbed.
After the attack on Pearl Harbor, invasion by the Japanese was the most immediate threat to New Zealand. If attacked, New Zealand on its own was helpless. Rather than return the New Zealand division in the Middle East, it was agreed that the Americans should establish a garrison in New Zealand. During the Pacific War, 100,000 GIs came to New Zealand. Many were in transit to the combat zones. Some were injured or recuperating. Collectively, they shook up the New Zealand way of life.
Pinch hitting for the traditional army mule, a donkey introduces football American fashion to Auckland. The kickoff. This is about the only time you ever see the ball in this game. The big crowd tries hard to follow the play, but only millions of Americans can understand it. Well, fashions come and fashions go, but we still like the game they play on Eden Park or Carisbrook every Saturday afternoon. Wheeling in comes this Liberator bomber, bringing Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt on her first visit to New Zealand. To meet her is the Governor-General and other officials. Her visit is a pleasant surprise, but all New Zealand is ready to welcome the distinguished wife of the President of the United States. Mrs. Fraser, representing the Prime Minister, greets Mrs. Roosevelt. Mrs. Roosevelt is here to visit American forces, the American Red Cross, whose uniform she wears. And she will see something of the war work of our women. New Zealand is honored to welcome this pleasant personality. In an exclusive interview, Mrs. Roosevelt gave us this message to the women of New Zealand.
Many of the women at home would like, I think, to send a message to the women of New Zealand, because so many of our boys have been stationed here that they know already how hospitable and kind the women of this country have been to the sons and husbands and brothers of the women in the United States.
To the Soviet embassy in London come RAF pilots. These pilots were members of the Hurricane fighter wing that fought in Russia. Today, 4 of them are to be decorated by the Soviet ambassador for their services there. This is an international occasion, and there are many visitors, including Mrs. Churchill. Leader of the British pilots was a New Zealander, Wing Commander Isherwood. On behalf of the Soviet government, Mr. Maisky presents him with the Order of Lenin. This high Soviet decoration is not only a recognition of the help given by the British wing to the Russian Air Force, but is also a tribute to Wing Commander Isherwood's outstanding qualities as leader and pilot.
This was the start of somebody's funeral. Hand grenades. 2 years ago, New Zealand didn't have enough grenades. Now she's got more than she needs, but she's not going to waste them. The Japanese, for instance, are very partial to them. They use their own for committing suicide, and these might save them the trouble. New Zealand men and women are turning out these grenades by the million. Made in New Zealand, from factory to fighting front, these grenades are a handout for Japan. Churning up mud on Pacific Islands today are wheels of armies that move relentlessly against Japan. Armies that have mastered new invasion tactics of amphibious war. Playing their part is New Zealand's 3rd Division. These pictures taken during their embarkation for the invasion of Nissen Island show one side of amphibious war. They show just what it takes to shift even part of a division in the Pacific. First, they must be assembled within striking distance of the enemy. Then you've got to move them speedily, without the enemy knowing, right into his front yard. A movement such as this would be impossible without sea and air superiority. Command of the sea makes possible the assembling of ships. It makes possible safe convoy. Command of the air prevents the Japs getting in early and smashing the invasion before it starts. It'd be nice going for any nip pilots who could bag these ships now before they get underway. For some of the men, there's work to do, filling the barrage balloons. Miss Missouri and her sisters, who provide another form of air protection.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Bob Hope. I'm not usually this serious, but what I have to talk to you about is a very serious problem. This matter of bonds. You know, there's a threatening feeling of optimism going on around the world today that is very dangerous to our lives. Places I've been, the talk isn't that way. I've seen a lot of boys fighting and dying and suffering, and they just can't believe that this war will end for a long time. Boys that walk into a hail of lead never ponder, they know it has to be done to save your homes and lives. So let's stand behind them and bring them back, because the sooner we bring them back, the more we'll bring back. Think it over. Buy some bonds.
It is less than a week since Casino fell, and along the roadside are many reminders that the fighting has only just moved on. These knocked-out tanks have not yet been salvaged. These Polish dead are yet unburied. It was over this ground that the most desperate battles of the whole Mediterranean campaign were fought. Here, for a long 5 months, the Germans managed to pin down the Allied advance. Up this steep slope, men had to fight. It was from this vantage point that the Germans directed their counterattacks against the New Zealand division 2 months before. With such odds against them, Casino had been too tough for even the Kiwis to crack. But the way they fought brings pride to the New Zealanders looking down on all that is left of Casino Town. Fortunately, the eruption doesn't hamper frontline activities, for the wind blows smoke and ashes in the opposite direction. But it's a different story for many Italians. Lava has already engulfed 2 mountainside villages and rendered 2,000 families homeless. This relentless creeping wall makes top stories into bottom stories. Later, the houses collapse under the weight. Villagers begin to salvage their household belongings when they see their homes are hopelessly doomed. These unfortunate people have already endured much suffering through starvation and warfare. Now Vesuvius has destroyed their homes. To this part of the country, where the division went into winter quarters, came the worst floods for 40 years. Again, it's leaden skies, greasy roads, and ditched transport. Once more, the engineers are fighting the Italian mud. With branches and tree trunks, they're filling the ruts and bridging the bogs, doing everything to keep these vital roads open. Along the roads come the heavy tanks of the New Zealand division. For 5 weeks, the 8th Army has been held up at Faenza, a German stronghold on the road to Bologna. Now, the heavily armored Kiwi division has been called up to punch forward with their shock troop tactics from the British 1 bridgehead. Less than 1,000 yards from the German line, our infantry find an Italian family living in a haystack. These unfortunate people are homeless, and this the only shelter they can find. Some of our men found themselves quartered in towns like this, where life was far from exciting. No gay restaurants, for instance. Just the same old mess. Out of doors when the weather permits. It's also the same food, unless you're lucky enough to find a nest egg or two. Or maybe a nice green cabbage from somebody's victory garden. Here, there's little to do. On Sunday, you can attend a real church for a change. Or chat with the local lasses. Or you may prefer to stay at home in the villa where you live. War isn't fighting all the time. It can be dull and drab and dreary. When the sun comes out, it's a chance to dry off soaked bedding and take the air again. As their tanks have stopped rolling, there's an empty paddock nearby, and it's just natural for New Zealanders to use it for football. After all, it is winter, but there isn't one of these boys who wouldn't prefer playing on his home ground. As the weather clears for a while, it's time to move on again. The monotony of hanging around has ended. This way went the enemy. Only machine gun fire comes from Faenza. It sounds as if Jerry, finding himself outgunned and outflanked, has pulled out. Cautiously, the New Zealand infantry advance. Last night's barrage finished this bridge, but there's still a way across the wreckage. Into the silent town they go in single file. Any one of these buildings may conceal a sniper or a machine gun. From the first inhabitants they see, they find out where the Germans sowed their mines, and the engineers set to work to clear the streets. This is a job where you've got to take your time. Jerry's out to catch the bloke who's in a hurry. And until the mines are cleared, the infantry have to wait. Chatting to the Italian partisan soldier who led them into the town fills in time while waiting. For these boys, this is one more town to their credit in the tough northward drive. And from cellars come the dazed townspeople to see what is left of homes. German demolitions, as much as our bombardment, are responsible for this destruction. Once more, there are prisoners. These from the 90th Panzer Grenadiers, old opponents of the Kiwi Division in both Africa and Italy. Of these, some are very young, some are arrogant, some amused, and some suspiciously friendly. Destruction. Farms, shops, or palaces are destroyed if they're of military importance. War is a scythe. Civilians can't live where the fighting is, and for several miles behind the lines at Faenza, they must go back, away from the danger area. When houses are toppling, they have to be pulled over before they fall over. War is worse than any earthquake. It's more than you can understand to see the place you've lived in for 60-odd years come tumbling down. It seemed so solid, such a part of your life. It's just as bad to see the place you've lived in for 4 years, pulled over by a bulldozer. New Zealanders don't like the job. They don't like to see people searching amongst the ruins for vestiges of their lives. They don't like to tell people that they can't go back to their homes because they'll be pulling them over in a few minutes. And when the houses are destroyed, they don't like to see people standing around, not knowing where to go or what to do. In winter, with no fireside, no warm bed, no chance of shutting the door and keeping the cold out. All they can do is shift the people back out of the danger zone to collection points. They also collect what cattle the Germans have left and bring them back too. An AMGOT officer sorts things out. The people trudge on. Some will go to friends or relatives. Some don't know where they'll go. But when the fighting passes, they'll come back as they have to Casino. Meanwhile, the guns go on and the houses fall. And the kids come back from the front line area, dazed and shaken, and looking the way kids never should look. War is destruction. War is man tearing down everything he has built and been proud of. If we are to protect the children in the future, these children, our children, we must do more than hope. We must make sacrifices. We must take every active step we can to stop war. Only if we succeed in that will the fighting have been worthwhile.
And children, listen to hear sleigh bells in the snow. I'm dreaming of a
The men are thinking about their Christmas dinner as they gather wood. Shortly, they're going to do some shopping. They know where they can get some first-class poultry. That was good hunting, and now it's a matter of agreeing on a price. This pig is for the Maori battalion, and to her new owner, she shows an almost dog-like devotion. Bringing home the wine is a responsible job. The first step in turning pig into pork, and for the onlookers, quite a cheering sight. Bringing home the wine is a responsible job. Having given a good account of the turkey hunt, it's time to cut the cackle and get on with the job. After weeks and months on tinned bully beef, this is certainly a sight worth watching. Tomorrow will be a lovely day. Bringing home the wine is a responsible job. Mail means a lot, especially at Christmas. There's always a feeling of anticipation and gratitude to the folks at home. That is, except for bully beef. Bringing home the wine is... That's what comes of putting all your wine in one basket. With a replacement, they'll just make it. Christmas dinner is now on at Div headquarters, and General Sir Bernard Freyberg comes to see the traditional ceremony of the officers serving the men. The Padre hands out 2 bottles of cheer per man. This is the origin of the word bottle dress. Christmas dinner tastes better when you wear a bowler. Thanks to the good organization and teamwork, this feed will be remembered for months to come. It's done a lot to make 1944 a memorable Christmas.
In Europe, the Allies moved steadily towards Germany, but in the Pacific, progress was slow. For the Americans, New Zealanders and Fijians, it was a bitter campaign.
In company with a reconnaissance plane, we take off from the fighter strip on an offensive mission. There go some of our Warhawks. They climb up from this Allied base, up above the bay, and set off down the coast to deliver their loads westwards to New Ireland and New Britain. On each side of Booker Passage, there's a Japanese airstrip, also supply and bivouac areas. The dive bombers get to work. Thanks to this constant use of our air power, Booker Passage is practically closed to enemy shipping, and its airstrips unusable. But the garrison still fires back. Those were Jap vegetable gardens. There are still many thousands of Japs cut off in the Solomons, starving but fighting. The RNZAF destroying their supplies, destroying their gardens, and bombing out their strongholds is helping to thin them out, and making it not quite so costly and difficult for the ground troops to finish the job. 3 miles in, grenades and rifle fire stopped them, leaving 5 with our cameraman cut off from the rest. With ammunition running short, they're in a tough spot, but the patrol behind attempts to reach them. The wounded man receives first aid, and with more ammunition now, they start pitching it into the Japs again. Jap grenades and mortar bombs are landing in front of them, and Jap rifles keep on cracking away. For 2 hours they stick this out. Once again they run short of ammunition. Under cover of grenades, the wounded are shifted out, and the patrol also prepares to move back after giving the Japs a final pasting. Flamethrowers in action, they can burn him out or drive him into the open to be finished off with rifles and grenades. Using everything they've got, they can start to move forward again. Flamethrowers and Bangalore torpedoes can wipe out the Jap, where shelling has only left him sitting tight. But to use these weapons takes men sweating and struggling through the foul and stinking jungle, fighting men face to face with the enemy. These boys have learnt well the tricks of jungle fighting, and this is proof of a job well done. But it's a job that will have to be done again and again before it's finally finished. Understand, if you can, how this little man had a mass following. The Nazi leaders revived the old Prussian militarism in a new and more terrible form. And as everyone knows now, they ruled even their own country by the unbelievable terrors of the concentration camps. By terror, and by putting on great theatrical performances such as this rally at Nuremberg, meant to make themselves and their followers feel important. They managed to seem quite impressive. Within these compounds, many New Zealanders captured in Greece and Crete were imprisoned. But they're leaving now. They're going home. Whilst they wait for transport to the air station at Klagenfurt, they can come and go as they please. these gates are open. But it's different for their ex-guards. They get brooms to sweep the camp. They have their first post-war jobs, and Russian prisoners watch them. Many of the Russians died through starvation and neglect. That was the fascist new order. These men have come to acknowledge defeat. These are the men who once dreamt of Japanese supremacy in the Pacific, even of world domination. From Lieutenant General Sturdy, commander of the 1st Australian Army, the Japs learn the terms of surrender. Imamura is told he must issue orders immediately to his commanders at Bougainville, New Britain, New Ireland, and New Guinea to surrender. And it's added, they will be treated with justice, firmness, and humanity. They brush their signatures to the documents. This is the end of a war which Japan began and we ended. The men came early up on deck, all those who could walk or limp from their beds. They had come home from Egypt, from Libya, sick and wounded. All of them quietly watching the hills come nearer, the harbor, and home. Down on the wharf, the people waited. It rained a little, but nobody noticed. They cheered a little, and a band played, but mostly everybody was quiet. Sentiment struck down too deep for cheers or shouting. That welcoming gathering of friendly people represented all that these men and women had dreamed about. Beyond the harbor lay the plains of Canterbury and the hills of Otago, quiet towns and unspoiled farms, friends and home.
A hospital ship is coming. Perhaps the children, being so very young, don't remember their father very clearly. Now the ship is coming in, and they can see the men on the decks. Is he there, amongst all those soldiers? The little boy waves hopefully, looking for a half-remembered face amongst that row of faces, and there are so many. And the little girl, still she can't see him, though they've started to come down the gangway. Man after man they come. Each shows some sign of injuries received in battle. Most of them are walking now after the long, restful voyage. Soon families are reunited.
Emotions are welling up as the Dominion monarch moves slowly to her berth at Pipitier Wharf. For the Maori people, this is the ship they've been waiting for. Down the gangway come men of the Maori battalion. Their casualty rate was 5 in 7. In the words of their commander, they return not as conquering heroes, but as the remnant of a brave battalion. Here at Ngaruo Wahia, the arrival of the train bringing home the men is marked by little activity, but their people are waiting for them on the marae. of the Maori battalion are home. Some men have paid. They fought for us.
Voices, I am sure, would say to us, we the dead have won the war. You, the living, must win the peace.
I want to say how darn glad I am to be back in little old NZ. After being right round the world, we're quite sure that it is God's own country.